Hi, I'm Chris. You might have noticed that the title of this video alludes to a book by Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis wrote a book addressed to his daughter to teach her all about how the economy actually works as opposed to what she would learn in an economics class. This video is me explaining to my father how different the economy is today from the one he knew when he was young, and why the idea that kids today are just lazy and that's why they don't all own their own homes is a load of rich creamery butter. From what my parents told me, I thought getting a job after high school would mean employers competing to hire us based on our marks and extracurriculars. I thought that was the point of studying hard and getting good grades. My dad got his job right after high school, and they paid him to study marketing so he could get promoted. He worked at the same company for decades. He got perks and a pension. But there's nothing like that anymore. You need a university degree for pretty much any job that isn't minimum wage, including millions of jobs for which a degree is unnecessary, and even then you might still just make minimum wage. No one's competing to hire you unless you just completed a STEM PhD program. No one gets the job they want because that job isn't available. It's already been filled by the son of the CEO. No one gets a salary that matches their experience. You're either on the bottom making the bare minimum forever, or on the top making exponentially more. And perks? Insurance? Raises? Benefits? Pensions? Now those are words I've not heard in a long time. What's more, most jobs don't have the power of a union behind them. Strong unions can organize and negotiate and fight with management for raises, safer workplaces, and other stuff. For a while, police and union busters were regularly unleashed on striking workers, and in many places still are. In 1935, the US finally legalized unions. Then, after World War II, it went back to undermining them. Reagan and Thatcher infamously did a lot to weaken the unions, but they were just links in a chain. The legal assault on organized labor is one factor explaining why the productivity gap, the difference between wages and the value of what labor produces, has been expanding steadily since the 1970s. Wages have barely moved in real terms, while shareholders have seen huge returns. That means the people doing all the work have made the rich richer than ever while reaping none of the benefits. Because shareholders own stuff, not workers. There are studies showing that if workers in the US had been paid the balance that was taken from them, in other words, if their wages had reflected their productivity, they would be many trillions of dollars richer. But ownership is everything under capitalism. Workers don't get to make the decisions, not for the corporations they work for and not for the government. Whereas if you own enough assets like land and corporations, the government works for you. Who can workers turn to for justice? They have to keep coming back for the same wages while the people who own the surplus get richer than ever. There is no universe in which the state and the capitalist class allow workers to keep $50 trillion that they've created. I personally think there shouldn't be a capitalist class or a state, and that people shouldn't be forced to work at all. But even if you don't want to go that far, shouldn't people be entitled to a greater share of what they produce? Why would just owning stuff, or even being a manager, mean that you deserve many times more money than the workers you depend on? Which group, owners and managers, or workers, do you think does more useful work? Which group is necessary, and which is only interested in controlling the other? And as worker protections erode with every new government, more employees become the victim of wage theft. Wage theft steals considerably more from workers than all other types of theft steal from corporations. That's because if you steal from a corporation, the state will hound you to the ends of the earth, whereas if you steal from your employees, probably nothing will happen to you. And that's not to mention the dirt wages you make as an undocumented worker or prison laborer. Poverty and slavery are all around us, deeply embedded into countless supply chains. But it's not because people are lazy. Paying such meager wages doesn't seem to lower prices either, as everything keeps getting more expensive. A common type of debt is student loans. I was really lucky as my parents could afford to pay my student loans for me. But most of my friends were stuck in debt for years. That's because they were reliably informed they would soon get jobs and pay off their debts. But the jobs available to them barely covered food and rent, let alone student loan payments. Another type of debt you can fall into nowadays is for groceries. So that's the barest intro into how corporations have been screwing us for the past 80 years. Most of us have had to work for a landlord, too. First, to get this out of the way, no one should own someone else's home. We all need one, and if you have to pay for one, every month you face the prospect of homelessness. Where I live, people become homeless and businesses go bankrupt every month because of rent. And landlords don't care. They just kick the old out into the street and bring in the new and unsuspecting. Because they own stuff. Ownership isn't just about money. It isn't about having unnecessarily large, shiny things. It's about power. Legally owning something means the police are obligated to protect your ownership of that thing. That's what people mean when they say property is a social relation. It comes with obligations and punishments. Since the beginning of the state thousands of years ago, small groups have claimed ownership over land, resources, and bodies. The emergence of capitalism created a new class of owners by snatching more land and more resources from more people wherever they could around the world, creating global markets for everything from spices to people. Since then, one of the main purposes of the state has been to protect and expand the property of the people who already own all the property. In the early to mid-20th century, many states introduced welfare provisions to cushion the impact of the inevitable unemployment, poverty, and strains on your physical and mental health that come with capitalism. Barely a generation later, the same states changed their minds and left millions out to dry. They also sold off state monopolies to pay down the debt, so the people who already owned everything could have direct control over entire industries. We kept getting told the market, which turned out to mean a bunch of executives and shareholders, would make things efficient, not like silly old government who can't even run a lemonade stand. They had graphs and charts that said we should free the market and privatize everything. With hindsight, we can see that was just 2 decades of Milton Friedman's empty rhetoric. Neoliberalism promised strong property rights and free markets, which shockingly only benefited people who owned property and controlled markets. But the damage was done. Ownership of everything people had come to rely on passed into the hands of a few thousand people. The state privatized its responsibilities, but retained and refined the power to punish in the interest of the wealthy. During the 1950s and 60s, the so-called mixed economies, so capitalist welfare states, grew at a decent rate. But growth slowed down and stopped in the 1970s. There were a couple of oil shocks, which I know my dad remembers, followed by stagflation, when growth stagnated and inflation accelerated. Even the rich started losing. They wanted their vastly unequal pile back, and they got it. After the implementation of neoliberal policies in the late 1970s, the share of national income of the top 1% of income earners in the US soared to reach 15%, very close to its pre-Second World War share by the end of the century. The top 0.1% of income earners in the US increased their share of the national income from 2% in 1978 to 6% in 1999. While the ratio of compensation of workers to the salaries of CEOs increased from just over 30 to 1 in 1970 to 500 to 1 by 2000. The US is not alone in seeing their rich get richer at everyone else's expense. Almost everywhere you could name has seen wealth concentrate further as a result of neoliberalism. The more concentrated the economy gets, the more consequential the decisions are. Since industry now owns the state that claims to regulate it, the state ignores economic crises until they've already happened. Then it bails out the people who caused them. In my dad's lifetime, there have been dozens of economic crises and crashes, depending how you measure them, and innumerable bankruptcies. Each of these episodes impoverished some people and enriched others, with people already marginalized for race, gender, disability, or something else, always getting the worst of it. We're talking about billions of dollars being vacuumed up by the ruling class every few years. We're talking about huge corporations rising and falling, merging and acquiring until markets are controlled by a small number of firms. That's how competition works. Some firms lose, and they get acquired by the bigger company, which is now in a position to dictate the terms of the market. I made a video about it if you want to learn more. As they got bigger, a lot of firms offshored production and killed 1 million jobs. It soon became the task of US and UK foreign policy to open up markets abroad, by war if necessary. This spreading of rights and freedoms has led to what's been called a race to the bottom, as firms find the best places to pay the lowest wages. Now practically everywhere has been opened up, privatized, and picked clean. That brings us round to today. What is the purpose of Trump's economic policy? Are they trying to crash the economy? Because a lot of businesses will go bust as a result of their tariff regime, but not all of them. Trump has promised to hear you out, i.e. make special provisions for you if you give him a bribe. If you can afford the new cost of doing business, your business will probably succeed. If it does, Trump and his family will presumably get some stake in it. They've already made billions of dollars off the presidency. When those businesses who won't kiss Trump's ass go bankrupt, those super rich right-wing sycophants who are left will fill the void. For years now, we've been used to markets characterized by oligopolies. The current economic crisis will whittle down the number of firms in each market until many of them are monopolies. That's the new economy, the end game of capitalism. A few people own everything, so everyone depends on them for everything. But at least the rest of us benefit from any economic growth, right? Still no. From 1980 to 2017, the 1% globally soaked up fully 37% of the world's per capita wealth growth. By 2021, the richest 1% of Americans owned a godforsaken 34.9% of our national wealth. Every person who deals with anxiety about paying bills, who's suffering from the inability to pay for medical care or hoping their oldest kid can hold down the fort while they pick up a shift, should think about the number 34.9% every night when falling asleep. Especially since by now it's even bigger. And unlike most of the upper 10%, the upper 1% owns the biggest corporations and financial assets. As we behold continents on fire, pandemics thrashing public health systems to smithereens, and falling economic prospects and lifespans, we must remember one thing. All this is for the benefit of a tiny number of people, a small class that owns the wealth and institutions of the economy, a ruling class for whom we are ruining every part of the natural systems on Earth, and screwing over a gigantic social majority that's desperate for a fair share of the wealth they produce in the first place. What are the effects of this inequality on society and the individual? The evidence gathered by social epidemiologists shows that large differences in income are a powerful social stressor that is increasingly rendering societies dysfunctional. For example, bigger gaps between rich and poor are accompanied by higher rates of homicide and imprisonment. They also correspond to more infant mortality, obesity, drug abuse, and COVID-19 deaths, as well as higher rates of teenage pregnancy and lower levels of child well-being, social mobility, and public trust. The homicide rate in the United States, the most unequal Western democracy, is more than 11 times that in Norway. Imprisonment rates are 10 times as high, and infant mortality and obesity rates twice as high. Stark inequality also makes us think some people are better than others, that we're superior and inferior, when such feelings could only ever be based on arbitrary criteria. Rates of status anxiety have been found to be increased in all income groups in more unequal societies. Chronic stress has well-documented effects on mortality. It can double death rates. Health-related behaviors are also affected by stress. Diet, exercise, and smoking all show social gradients, but people are least likely to adopt healthy lifestyles when they feel stressed. Violence and bullying are also linked to competition for social status. Aggression is frequently triggered by disrespect, humiliation, and loss of face. Bullying among school children is around 6 times as common in more unequal countries. In the United States, homicide rates were 5 times as high in states with higher levels of inequality as in those with a more even distribution of wealth. That's what we all live with now. Why doesn't my dad know about all this? They've mentioned most of these events on the news at some point, but it's hard to see patterns when you watch the news every day. I guess people don't really remember that kind of thing. They just remember a New York Times op-ed making a superficially plausible argument about how young people are just lazy, not like us industrious boomers. There must be something satisfying about thinking your generation is superior to today's young people. We're the good generation, whereas the deterioration of everything is the fault of the youth, not us. The fact is, my dad's generation solved next to nothing. All the same problems exist, and aside from lead, CFCs, and asbestos, all of them are worse. If I had done nothing to make the world better for the next generation, and I like to think I haven't, I wouldn't blame them for it. But I'm not blaming the old people either. It's not easy to change things. It takes the sustained commitment of lots of people over time. Every generation says they're on it, but it's mostly just been small groups of determined people. So let's join those groups, make them large groups so we can tackle this enormous problem of inequality.